Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast coming to you at the end of week 8 of the 2025 NFL season. A week where, and I always want this every single week, I want the off field matters to dominate the agenda more than the on field matters. And let us just say that certainly happened over the course of the weekend and the previous couple of days as well. You know what I'm talking about, but don't worry, we will get into it. But before we do get into it, we need to do the admin for the show, which is, as always, the simplest. Thank you very much for joining us and listening to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe on our YouTube channels, and don't forget to reach out on our social medias as well. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and on Twitter we are at MRB Sports Media. And if you are watching this on YouTube, I say if, this is the only platform that you can get it on now. Don't forget to, again, as I said, like, subscribe, give a comment, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you know when our next episode is coming. If you are a returning listener, then as always, thank you very much for joining us. And if you are new, then don't forget to reach out on those platforms and keep the debate going. And with that, we shall dive into our first topic, and there is only really one place to start when it comes to the big picture off-field topics, and that is the situation surrounding Lamar Jackson and his return from injury. Now, I did say during last week's podcast that his injury status last week was going to be crucial in determining what the Baltimore Ravens are going to look like moving forward, because I'll be honest, I didn't think they were going to be the Bears without Lamar Jackson. Now, it turns out they did, and we'll get more into that later. But I said that if Lamar Jackson is back, then the Ravens have a good chance of moving forward. If he isn't, then I think that could very well have ended their season. Now, he did come back. However, the manner in which he came back has caused a big stir around the NFL. Now, I'm sure you have paid attention to it, but for those of you who maybe had it off to the side and didn't pay too much attention to it, he was brought back gradually, as many people thought would happen, because this was them coming off their bye week. So he had a chance to rest it, he had a chance to rest up and then gradually be brought back. However, at the end of the week, he was listed as a full participant in practice. However, in reality, he was only a quote unquote full participant by taking the team or the practice teams or the scout teams reps and working through. The scout team is basically the opponent's offense, which I think sort of makes sense. Caleb Williams is good with his legs. Lamar Jackson is very good with his legs. So if there's anyone that you want to copy Caleb Williams, it's probably Lamar Jackson. So the Baltimore Ravens list him as a full participant, which I think in most people's eyes would probably be fair because he was a full participant in practice. It wasn't as if he just took part in the stretches, just to limber his body up a little bit and then stayed away from the contact, because that would be limited in practice. He was a full participant. He was taking part in drills. So in the Baltimore Ravens' eyes, he was a full participant. However, in the eyes of the league, he was not a full participant, and the way that it goes is unless you are taking part in what your usual repetition, your usual reps would be, then you are listed as limited. If you were taking part in, either the first team or the second team reps, as you would be if you were a first team or a backup, then you would be listed as a full participant. That is the way that the injury report is meant to work. Now, I've always taken an issue with the injury report because whilst I sort of understand why it needs to be done and why it was brought in, because it was brought in to help the gamblers. Given the way the NFL previously and historically has treated gamblers, wanted to keep at arm's length away from it until they decided they could get money off of it and do all the partnering, but that's beside the point. For so long, they kept it at arm's length. But okay, if gambling is allowed in the US, then fine, you should be able to make it, a little bit more transparent and say, right, we think he may go, it's going to be a game time decision. That's, to an extent, all fine. However, whilst I see the need for it, I've always felt it a little bit weird because of the wordings that they use with limited. Okay, how limited was he? Was he, do it only 50% of what he would normally do, or was it only 75% of what he would normally do? And then there's always the doubtful designation or game time decision, which again, to an extent, I kind of get. Game time decision. Okay, we won't really know until he's had his last, ankle strapped up? Is he good to go? In this scenario, or his hamstring wrapped up? Is he really good to go when it comes to game day and when it comes to contact and depending on the field he's on? All those sorts of things and the weather conditions. Even something like that. If the if underfoot rather is a little bit dodgy, then you might think, oh, if a player has a bad ankle, then you might think these aren't the conditions for you. We'll pull you out. Again, to an extent, I get it, but I do think changes do need to be made if we are going to continue down the line of using injury reports and the words that we use as a designation for players as for players injuries. And now, in the aftermath of all this, John Harbaugh and the Baltimore Ravens have basically said it was an honest mistake. And I agree with them. I'm not usually one to defend the Baltimore Ravens because they are in the division, but I genuinely do think it was an honest mistake. Someone who may not be as au fait with the injury report as others came in and said, okay, he was a full participant. We'll list him as a full participant. Something got mixed up in the communications and it happened. Okay. I believe it was an honest mistake. However, given the news that had gone on during the week regarding the NBA and betting and players not disclosing or disclosing their injury status to certain people, I think that is something that the Baltimore Ravens should have been extrally doubly cautious on. Because again, in this environment, especially with a star player, I think it would have been different if it was a backup cornerback, though they were talking about, or the third string offensive lineman. I think it would have been handled a little bit differently if it were, not Lamar Jackson, one of the faces of the league, and the extra importance that goes along with it. But after everything that had gone on in the previous couple of days, and the fact that again it was injuries were part of it, if I was the Baltimore Ravens, I would have just been extra ultra cautious on that situation because how can you make the same sort of mistake or again handle the injury status when injury status and prop bets and all that stuff and affecting gamblers hit the headlines that week? Should there not have been someone within the Baltimore Ravens organization saying, we've seen what's gone on, are we absolutely doubly sure that this is how it is meant to be in the books? And that is why I think, again, the timing of it could not be worse. If this had happened with Lamar Jackson a week earlier, I think it would have been a much smaller story. But the fact it came out in the same week as the NBA, I think the NFL are going to make an example of the Baltimore Ravens in this, mainly as a way so they can get out in front of it and say, "Hey, we're big," a bit like they did with concussions to say, "Hey, we got it wrong, we messed up, but now we're gonna correct it and make sure we come down hard so that it doesn't happen again." And I think they're going to use the Baltimore Ravens as an example in this again, just so they can really get one up on the NBA and whatever punishment they're going to give out to their people, the NFL can go, we are just as serious, if not more serious, than you. Now, what punishment it's going to be exactly is still to be clarified. There's various reports that it could be a serious fine. I think that's probably inevitable. A loss of draft picks. I think that again is probably to be expected. I don't imagine it being a first round pick. For instance, I imagine it maybe being a sixth or a seventh. One potential punishment I did see listed as an option was suspensions. I don't really know how you could enforce that. Like, who do you suspend in this situation? There's going to be an investigation into this. How long it's going to take, not too sure. But do you suspend one of the trainers for not giving the right info to the communications department? Do you suspend the communications department for not putting out the right details with it? Do you suspend John Harbaugh? I don't really I don't really think so. You can't suspend Lamar Jackson because he's innocent in all this. But if you're going down the line of suspension, who do you really go after? That's the one thing I'm very, very curious about in all of this. So I think losing a mid to low round draft pick, I think is fair. Suspensions, I don't think it'll be that egregious. 50,000 maybe. I don't see it being a six-figure fine personally, but we've seen what the NFL have done. We'll have to wait and see. But I certainly don't think that suspensions are going to be on the table. Well, let me know what you think. Do you think there's going to be? Well, There will definitely be punishment, but what do you think the punishment is going to be by the NFL to the Baltimore Ravens? Now, sticking in the AFC North for my second topic, and this one somewhat rolls around on the pitch matters, but it involves Myles Garrett, who I've talked about many a time before on this. And I want to start off by saying I think Myles Garrett is a great player. Do I think he's better than TJ Watt? No, but I do think Myles Garrett is a great player and one of the best defensive ends in the league. I don't think that's a controversial take, but he is a great player. Showed it this weekend with his 5 sacks against the New England Patriots. However, his actions on the sideline, basically showing how disgruntled he was, brought me back to what I've said a couple of times. I can't remember the last time I said it, but it was very recently. I hold no sympathy for Myles Garrett for what he is going through in Cleveland. He requested a trade, which I think it was fair. He realizes what talent he is. Everyone realizes what talent he is, and he's not going to do it. He's not going to win a Super Bowl with the Cleveland Browns. He said in his, social media post when he requested a trade saying, my dream was to win a Super Bowl. I don't think anyone would begrudge Myles Garrett a trade. However, he then said, stuff the trade and went for the money that the Cleveland Browns offered instead. So, as I've said, there is no sympathy from me for what he is having to quote unquote go through. He made that decision. Given his contract situation at the time, he could very easily have stuck with his trade demand, waited for someone to come in and make an offer to the Cleveland Browns, and then move on. He could have gone to the Packers. We saw what they did with Micah Parsons. Myles Garrett is from Texas. From Texas, he could have been the Micah Parsons replacement for the Dallas Cowboys very easily if they decide to go that way. If I am the Cleveland Browns, I am making him number one trade target, fodder, whatever word you want to use. Bait. I think is probably the better word. I'm making him number one trade bait with the NFL trade deadline coming up next week. It is clear for everyone to see that the Cleveland Browns are not going to win a Super Bowl anytime soon, especially this season with the way they've started. So why not use this upcoming draft, 2026, to reset the whole damn thing? They already have 2 first-round picks next year, which they can, do with whatever they want. Depending on where they finish, they could take the number one pick, which I don't think is out of the realms of possibility, bundle or use the picks they have to bundle up and move up. Whatever. They have 2 very big bits of draft capital already in their hand. I think they need to go the whole hog and try and get as many first round picks as they can next year. Just use next year as a hard reset. They're going to have to do something at the quarterback position. Whether or not that is Dylan Gabriel, we don't know. But maybe they can do it and get a quarterback. Maybe someone stuns us in the next couple of months because the quarterback draft class doesn't really look all that promising. It's not quite the 2018 draft where it was Mayfield and Darnold and Allen and all that lot. It's not, and Lamar Jackson as well was one of them. It's not looking like that, but I do still believe that one player will come through and emerge as the next great savior. If they can offload Myles Garrett, I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility that they can get a first round pick for him next year. That then gives them 3 first round picks. Now, I know it is incredibly rare for any team to have that many picks in the first round. I mean, naturally, organically coming into it, you can always trade into the first round or whatever, but going into the draft with 3 first round picks, that does not happen a lot. You can do a serious rebuild over the entire franchise with 3 first round picks. Now, and then even if you add on, they could likely ask for a couple of seconds and maybe a third or whatever on top of that. Maybe use that to package, go back in and get another pick on draft night. I think the Browns need to move on from Myles Garrett. I get that he is a keystone ace of the franchise, arguably the best player that the Cleveland Browns have ever had in their new iteration since 1999. I don't want to go back to like Otto Graham and I think it was Otto Graham and Jim Brown or whatever, but the new Cleveland Browns. There has not been a better player than Myles Garrett. But you do have to make sacrifices sometimes. if Tom Brady can be moved on from the New England Patriots and Peyton Manning can be moved on from the Indianapolis Colts, the Cleveland Browns can absolutely move on from Myles Garrett. Simple as that. And I don't think you are going to get a better time and window to trade him than right now. And again, the actions, his demeanor the past couple of weeks, when he's talked about playing with the Browns, I think it's pretty obvious he is on his last legs with the Browns. I think he's run out of time. Now, at least his contract's taken care of. That's the hard bit out of the way. So at least a team that trades for him will know exactly what they want, what they have. It's not going to be a situation if they did it in the summer where they're going to trade for him, and then have to negotiate a contract. They know what they're getting. But I just think on the Cleveland Browns side, use this hard reset again for the franchise, but you're going to have to do it without Myles Garrett. I think that's just the stone cold hard truth of the matter. And with that, we move on to our wrap up segment around the league. And I don't know if this really counts as an on-field or an off-field thing, but I want to start by talking about the Minnesota Vikings and their quarterback situation, because now that Carson Wentz is done for the season, they face a very, very tricky crossroads when it comes to JJ McCarthy, who is on his way back from an injury of his own and has been listed as the emergency third quarterback for the past couple of weeks, which means that if things got really, really desperate, he could have gone in. And it looks as if he may be starting this week against the Lions. Maybe it's still too early to determine officially whether or not that's going to happen. But I think the Vikings need to be very, very careful with this, because not only is he coming back from injury, he's coming up against a very, very good team with a very good, very good defender in Aiden Hutchinson going across from him. This could, if I was the Vikings, I would sit him out for one more game. I would not want to trust him in this situation, coming back from injury. A, potentially risking further injury, and B, if he's not 100% and he can't play 100%, what is that? And no, play at 100%, and he doesn't put up the greatest of numbers, which, let's face it, he hasn't exactly been doing all season anyway to begin with before his injury. What is that going to do to his confidence moving forward? And as a result, what is that going to do to the Vikings' confidence in him moving forward? I think this is one of those you want to, maybe lose the battle to win the war. And I think I would just leave him just one more week just to be absolutely sure that he is 100% healthy, can go, and is playing in, much more favorable circumstances for him to succeed. I think that is the best way to go. I don't think this is the right game for him to come back and play in. And I think it could, again, if things go bad, it could start a very, very awkward downward spiral for him and the Vikings if he gets injured or if he doesn't play to the best of his ability. I think there is a significant chance, not total chance, but I think there is a significant chance that happens. So I would be very cautious about that. Moving on, I do need to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers defense and just how troubling it has been. For what the Pittsburgh Steelers are paying their star players, they have been absolutely atrocious this season. Now, there are some young players who I think have done well. I think Derek Harmon has done good. I think Y.A. Black has done good. I think Peyton Wilson, the second-year player, is also doing quite good for what we expect of them, and they are quite young. But for the experienced players, the likes of Cam Hayward, the likes of TJ Watt, the likes of Jalen Ramsey, for what we are paying them to be putting up performances like that, not only just the numbers, but the just sheer performances as well, have been atrocious. No real splash plays, no big moments that we saw in the early part of the season. For us to be playing like that is down near abysmal. I think it needs to be said. And honestly, a bit like a couple of seasons ago when we realised there needed to be a change at the offensive coordinator because Matt Canada wasn't getting it done. I think there needs to be a movement now to get rid of Terrell Austin, because he's really the only scapegoat left. And I think if you can't start producing then you need to get a new face in, someone who maybe be a little bit more aggressive and can actually start getting results. Because Terrell Austin is not doing that, especially for for the players that he has to work with, and the potential of the players that he has to work with. For us to be putting up the numbers like that is just shocking. Moving on, just to prove that I am not a total flip flopper in some areas, the Miami Dolphins and their big win over the Atlanta Falcons, I think says more about the Atlanta Falcons and what they can do or not do this season than anything else. I do think that was pretty much a stay of execution for the Miami Dolphins and head coach Mike McDaniel. I do still think that they are going to be sellers at the trade deadline, and I would recommend that as well. A bit like the Cleveland Browns, where I say it's time for a total reset, I think there are plenty of pieces that you can get rid of in Miami. And whoever the next coach is, let him operate with that. Tyreek Hill may not be worth a first these days, but maybe a 2 and a 3. Maybe you can package that into a 1. Maybe, yeah, I'm speculating here, but you can certainly add Arsenal with the players that you have. I think that needs a total rebuild in Miami, and I don't think that this win is going to do anything to change that. The Baltimore Ravens, as I talked about at the start, given a shred of life. The fact that they were able to go and beat the Bears, who I thought the Bears were going to win. The fact that they were able to go and get a win in that again in those circumstances gives them just a shred of life. I think it's weird that they are now seen by some people as the favourites to win the AFC North, rather, even though they got a huge you know gap back, or they are so far behind the Pittsburgh Steelers at the top. I think that says more about the Pittsburgh Steelers than it does the Baltimore Ravens, that people think that they can come back and win it. But a lot of it is going to rely on Lamar Jackson. And this Thursday, their game against the Miami Dolphins is going to be a very, very interesting telling point. If he is back to 100%, I think it's more of a chewed up game for him, because I think the Ravens will beat the Dolphins handily. But if he can at least get one, get back up to speed, not re-injure himself, which I think is the most crucial thing, then I think the Ravens will be okay. Maybe it's a little bit too late, or they've got too much ground to make up, especially given the schedule they've got moving forward. But it'll be very interesting to see what they do. But again, that win gives them just a shred of life, not only in the AFC North, but also the AFC, because, still the chance to get hot, maybe get a wild card, and maybe turn something in from there. And finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention the Indianapolis Colts, who I don't think I've talked a lot about on this podcast. And if I'm being honest, have taken me completely by surprise. I think, well, taking the whole league by surprise. To now be 7-1 is an incredible achievement. And if you look at their schedule coming up, Pittsburgh Steelers this weekend, the way that both teams are going, I can see the Indianapolis Colts winning that. The Falcons, that's a game in Germany, neutral ground. I know that sort of throws potential things out the window, but I think that's a winnable game for them. Then they come off their bye, and apart from the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 12, you look at the rest of it: Texans, Jaguars, Seahawks, 49ers, Jaguars, Texans. That's easily 11 to 12 wins if they keep going the way they are going. Daniel Jones, absolutely brilliant year. Jonathan Taylor, even better year. I think definitely both players in the MVP conversation. But what I would say about the Colts, and again, they've done well, and I think they're going to continue doing well this season. I do not want to see Daniel Jones in the running for the Comeback Player of the Year award. I've made this point clear in the past, and I know the NFL has changed their voting regulations somewhat when it comes to Comeback Player of the Year. That award is reserved for people who are coming back from a serious injury, not from someone who was playing badly, or in the case of Joe Flacco a couple of years ago, just didn't play. I I give Daniel Jones a couple of other awards. I don't want to see him in the Comeback Player of the Year award, because what's he coming back from? Being benched and cut by the Giants? No, I just don't see it. So give him other awards, but do not give him Comeback Player of the Year award. That's just my one gripe with the Indianapolis Colts this season. Now, before we go, as always, I like to touch with one subject away from the NFL, and this one is from the world of soccer, football, depending on how you word it, and sort of talks about the world of betting, which we talked about at the start with Lamar Jackson and the NBA implication, all things going on there. If you think the situation around the NBA is bad, just wait until you hear what has gone on in Turkey. Turkey? I don't know how to pronounce it now. Turkey. Not being offensive, I'm used to saying Turkey all my life. I'm just going to call it Turkey for now. But in the Turkish Football League, there is a betting scandal that puts the NBA to shame, if you want to put it that way, because it has emerged that 65% of referees in Turkish football have active betting accounts, and over 25% of them are actively betting on sports. Now, whatever you want to say about the NBA and what's been going on there and how big a scandal it is, peanuts compared to what is going on in Turkey. I think that is something. I know a couple of years ago there was a match fixing scandal in Italy, and they basically caused Juventus, one of the biggest teams in world football, to be relegated as a result of it. A couple of the other big teams got points deductions. I am genuinely curious to see what the punishment is going to be in Turkey. I would not be surprised if they just shut the whole league down, because how can you have any sense of integrity when that many referees have betting accounts and are betting on sports? It just calls into question every single kind of integrity. But we will wait and see exactly what happens on that, and we will wait and see what happens in the NFL, because that is the end of our show. We will wait to see what happens next week. As always, I'd like to end the show by thanking you very much for listening to us. Again, if you're new, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, do whatever it is that you need to do, and don't forget to follow us on our socials. We are at Borden Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and on Twitter we are at MRB Sports Media. So feel free to check us out on that. And if you're a returning listener, then as always, thank you very much for making me just a little part of your week, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back next week talking about plenty more stuff that's gone on around the NFL, and hopefully there's some juicier and hopefully not as controversial topics to talk about next week. But until next time, take care, and as always, stay safe.